Pay attention, because what I'm about to say, most people will hear it and think of someone else. The ones who need it will feel it like a knife in the chest. There is a moment, no warning, no argument, no slammed doors, no dramatic last words, just silence. And by the time you notice it, you've already lost them. Here's what nobody tells you. The most dangerous exit a human being can make is not the loud one. It's not the screaming. It's not the fighting. The most devastating thing a person can do is go quiet. Because silence doesn't mean they stopped caring. It means they finished grieving you. While you were busy being unaware, they were trying, communicating, adjusting, absorbing, staying up at night, replaying conversations, giving you benefit of the doubt you never earned. Their nervous system on high alert, scanning for repair, reaching for connection, hoping, just once, the effort would be matched. And then one day, no announcement, no ceremony. Something shifted. Not away from you, back to themselves. And here is the truth that will rewire how you see every relationship in your life. Their silence is not confusion. It is not distance. It is not a phase. It is completion. And once an empath returns to themselves, no apology, no gesture, no promise on this earth can rebuild what that silence has already sealed. This is not a love story. This is a wake-up story, and it starts right now. Pause hard after back to themselves. Let the room sit in silence for 3 full seconds. That pause is the message. Most people get this completely wrong, and I mean completely. When someone goes quiet, when the texts slow down, when the energy shifts, when the warmth that used to come so naturally suddenly feels measured and careful, the first thing people think is that something just happened, that there was a trigger, a moment, a single conversation that flipped a switch. But that is not how this works, not even close. By the time you feel the silence, the real silence, you are not standing at the beginning of a problem. You are standing at the end of a very long story that you were never fully present for. And that is the part that should shake you. Think about what had to happen before that quiet arrived. Think about how many conversations were had with full honesty and open hands. How many times someone sat across from you or next to you and tried to explain what they were feeling in the clearest words they could find. How many times they softened their tone because they didn't want to seem aggressive. How many times they chose the right moment, the right setting, the right approach, because they genuinely believed that if they just communicated it correctly, something would change. They were not being dramatic. They were not being needy. They were doing what emotionally intelligent people do. They were trying to build something real. And every single time that effort was met with deflection or defensiveness or half-hearted acknowledgement or worse, silence from your side, something small died. Not loudly, not visibly, just quietly, like a candle losing its flame not to wind, but to the slow exhaustion of its own wax. This is what people miss. The silence you are witnessing right now is not the problem. The problem lived in every moment before this one. It lived in the dismissed conversation, in the repeated pattern that never changed, in the apology that came without any shift in behavior, in the emotional reaching that was never matched. The silence is simply the result. It is what happens when a human being has done everything within their emotional capacity to be heard and wasn't. There is something that happens in the nervous system when effort is repeatedly met with nothing. The brain begins to register that connection as unsafe, not dangerous in a physical sense, but unsafe in the way that matters most to someone who feels deeply. Unsafe for vulnerability, unsafe for honesty, unsafe for the kind of rawness that real connection actually requires. And so the system does what all intelligent systems do under chronic stress. It protects itself. It pulls back the investment. It stops sending signals into a space that never sends anything back. It begins the quiet, invisible, devastating process of letting go, not in anger, not in haste, but in the slow and certain way that only exhausted love knows how to do. The silence you are seeing right now is not the beginning of their leaving. It is the last page of a book they finished writing alone. Nobody sees it coming. That is the part that catches people completely off guard. One day everything seems fine, maybe not perfect, maybe a little distant, but fine enough. And then suddenly the person is gone. Not physically, not yet, but gone in the way that actually matters. gone in their eyes, gone in their energy, gone in the way they used to look at you like you were something worth staying for. And the natural reaction is to ask, what happened? What did I do? When did this change? But that is entirely the wrong question, because the real answer is not a moment. It is a timeline, a long, private, invisible timeline that was running inside that person long before you ever noticed anything different on the outside. This is what makes it so difficult to understand. Empaths do not leave the way most people leave. They do not reach a breaking point and explode. They do not issue ultimatums. They do not send the long angry message at 2 in the morning laying everything out on the table. That is not how their emotional system operates. Their system is slower, deeper, more internal than anything you will ever see on the surface. The goodbye for an empath does not start the day they walk away. It starts the day they stop believing things will change. And those 2 days can be months apart, sometimes years. In between those 2 days, they are still there, still showing up, still responding, still present in all the ways you can physically measure. But internally, something has already begun. A quiet grieving that most people never detect because it does not look like grief from the outside. It looks like calm. It looks like acceptance. It looks, honestly, like everything is fine. But inside, they are processing. They are replaying. They are sitting with the painful and honest realization that the version of this relationship they held onto, the potential they believed in, the person they saw underneath all the dysfunction, may not be something that ever fully arrives. And that realization does not come like a thunderstorm. It comes like winter, slowly, gradually, until one day you look outside and everything that was once warm and alive has gone completely still. They grieve the conversations that should have happened but never did. They grieve the emotional availability that was promised but never consistently delivered. They grieve the intimacy of being truly known by someone, and slowly accepting that this particular person may never have that capacity for them. This grief is real, it is heavy, and they carry every ounce of it privately. Because here is the thing about people who feel deeply. They do not process pain outward, they process it inward. They sit with it, they turn it over, they examine it from every angle with a brutal kind of honesty that most people never apply to their own emotions. They ask themselves the hard questions. They hold themselves accountable. They make sure, absolutely sure, that what they are feeling is real and not just reaction before they allow themselves to act on it. By the time they go quiet on the outside, they have already said goodbye on the inside, the tears have already been cried. The anger has already moved through them. The hope has already been examined, honored, and gently released. What you are seeing when an empath finally withdraws is not the beginning of their leaving. It is the last visible step of a departure that began long ago in a place you never had access to, in the quiet spaces of their own mind, in the private hours when they were still right next to you, already learning how to live without you. Let me say something that I need you to actually hear. Not just process, not just nod at, actually hear it and let it land somewhere real inside you. When an empath shuts down, when they go quiet, when they pull back, when the warmth disappears, and they become this calm, composed, almost unreachable version of themselves, that is not weakness. That is not them being sensitive. That is not them being dramatic or difficult or too much to handle. What you are witnessing in that moment is a nervous system that has been running at full capacity for so long that it has finally done the only intelligent thing it could do. It shut the gate. And before you dismiss that, before you file it away as emotional language or exaggeration, I want you to understand that this is not a metaphor. This is biology. This is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do when it has been exposed to chronic stress for an extended period of time. Here is what is actually happening inside the body of someone who feels deeply and has been emotionally overextending for months. Their mirror neurons, the part of the brain responsible for feeling what other people feel, are firing constantly, not occasionally, constantly. Every shift in your mood, every change in your tone, every subtle tension you carry in your shoulders, they are registering all of it, processing all of it, absorbing all of it into their own emotional body whether they choose to or not. This is not something they control. This is not a personality trait they develop to be difficult. This is how their brain is literally wired. The sensitivity is neurological. The attunement is automatic. And when that level of emotional processing runs without pause, without relief, without reciprocity, the body begins to pay a real and measurable price. Cortisol builds, the stress hormone that your body releases under pressure. It accumulates. And when it accumulates over time without adequate emotional recovery, it does not just make you feel tired. It changes how you think. It changes how you perceive safety. It changes how much emotional risk you are willing to take in a relationship. The brain under chronic emotional stress begins making different calculations. It starts asking different questions. Not, how do I connect here? But, how do I survive here? And that shift is everything. Because the moment the brain moves from connection mode to survival mode, the empath stops leading with their heart and starts leading with self-protection. Not because they became cold, not because they stopped caring, but because the most fundamental part of their biology finally intervened and said, enough. We cannot keep spending what we do not have. Think about it this way. Imagine running a marathon every single day, not metaphorically, physically. Every day you wake up and you run a full marathon. At first you push through because you are committed, because you believe in the destination, because you are the kind of person who does not quit easily. But eventually, no matter how strong your will is, your body breaks down. Your muscles give out, not because you are weak, because you are human. Emotional exhaustion works the exact same way. There is only so much empathy a person can extend into a space that never refills them before the system demands rest. Before the nervous system stops cooperating with the effort. Before the brain physically begins withdrawing resources from the relationship and redirecting them inward just to keep the person functional. This is not a choice they make consciously. This is the body choosing life. And what looks like coldness from the outside, what looks like distance, what looks like indifference, what looks like they simply stopped caring overnight, is actually the final evidence of just how hard they were trying before you ever noticed anything was wrong. The shutdown is not proof of weakness. It is proof of how much they carried alone before the weight finally became too much for even the strongest nervous system to hold. There is something that people fundamentally misunderstand about an empath's silence. And this misunderstanding, this one specific error in interpretation, is responsible for more damage in relationships than almost anything else I can think of. People see the quiet and they immediately assign it meaning. They call it manipulation. They call it passive aggression. They call it punishment. They look at the person who has gone still and they say, they are doing this on purpose. They are trying to make me feel guilty. They are playing games. And I need you to understand how completely and devastatingly wrong that interpretation is, because the silence is not a weapon. It was never a weapon. It is a wall. And there is a profound difference between those two things. A weapon is designed to hurt someone else. A wall is designed to protect yourself. And by the time an empath builds that wall, by the time they stop reaching, stop explaining, stop initiating, stop trying to make you understand what is happening inside them, they have already tried every other option available to them. The wall is not the first response. It is the last one. Think about what came before the silence. There were words, so many words. Carefully chosen, honestly delivered, vulnerably offered words. There were conversations that started with, I just want you to understand how I feel, and ended with nothing changing. There were explanations that were met with defensiveness. There were moments of raw honesty that were minimized or redirected or simply not received in the way they were intended. There were attempts to clarify, to reframe, to soften, to approach from a different angle. All because the empath genuinely believed that if they could just find the right way to say it, something would shift. That belief, that communication can fix anything if you do it correctly enough, is one of the most deeply held values an empath carries. They believe in the power of honest conversation. They believe that two people who are both willing to be real with each other can work through almost anything. And so they keep trying. They keep adjusting their approach. They keep giving the benefit of the doubt. They keep choosing vulnerability over silence even when vulnerability keeps coming back to them empty. But there comes a specific moment, not dramatic, not explosive, just quiet and certain, when they realize something that changes everything. The problem was never how they said it. The problem is that the other person either cannot or will not go to the emotional depth that real understanding requires. And you cannot communicate your way through a wall that exists inside someone else. You cannot find the magic combination of words that unlocks empathy in a person who is not ready or willing to access it. At some point, words stop being a bridge and start being an expenditure with no return. And when that happens, when speaking no longer produces safety, when honesty no longer produces understanding, when vulnerability no longer produces connection, silence stops being absence and becomes something else entirely. It becomes a boundary. Not the kind of boundary that gets announced. Not the kind that comes with a list of rules and consequences. The quiet kind. The kind that forms naturally when a person finally decides that their inner world is too valuable to keep offering to someone who consistently handles it carelessly. The kind of boundary that says, I am no longer going to spend my emotional energy trying to be understood by someone who has repeatedly shown me they are not available for that depth of understanding. And here is what makes this so important to grasp. Boundaries built from silence are actually the most honest boundaries a person can create because they are not built from anger. They are not built from ego or pride or a desire to win. They are built from self-awareness, from the clear and painful recognition that continuing to speak is no longer serving healing. It is only serving more hurt. When an empath stops correcting misunderstandings, they are not being dishonest. They are being selective with their truth because their truth was not being honored. When they stop bringing up things that bother them, they are not becoming indifferent. They are protecting the part of themselves that kept getting wounded every time they tried to be seen. When they stop asking for what they need, they are not giving up on needs altogether. They are simply accepting that this particular source cannot meet them. And that acceptance, quiet, clear, and completely internal, is one of the most self-respecting decisions a human being can make. People confuse silence with surrender, but for an empath, silence is often the opposite of surrender. It is the moment they stop abandoning themselves in order to maintain a connection. It is the moment they stop twisting their words into softer shapes just to avoid conflict. It is the moment they stop making themselves smaller so that someone else can stay comfortable. The silence is not them shutting you out. It is them finally, after everything, letting themselves back in. It is them reclaiming the energy they spent on conversations that went nowhere, reclaiming the emotional space that was constantly occupied by someone else's inability to show up, reclaiming their own nervous system from the chronic state of alertness it lived in every time they tried to reach you and came back empty. So when you notice the quiet, when the person who used to fight for understanding suddenly stops fighting altogether, do not mistake that stillness for indifference. Do not mistake that calm for apathy. Do not make the error of thinking that because they are no longer reacting, nothing is happening inside them. Everything is happening inside them. They are just no longer doing it out loud because they finally understood something that took them far too long and far too much pain to learn, that their voice deserves a room that can hold it. And if this room cannot, they will simply stop speaking here and start listening to themselves instead. This is the part that nobody wants to talk about because it is uncomfortable. It challenges something most people quietly believe, that if you just say the right thing, make the right gesture, show up at the right moment with enough sincerity, you can get someone back. You can reopen what closed. You can rebuild what fell. Most people operate on the assumption that love is always recoverable, that time and effort and the right words can reverse almost any damage. But there is one specific shift that makes that assumption completely false, and that shift is peace. When an empath finds genuine peace without your presence in their life, not the temporary relief of a quiet day, not the numb exhaustion that follows a painful period, but real, settled, internal peace, something in the dynamic changes permanently, not dramatically, not loudly, just permanently. Because you cannot compete with someone's inner stillness. You cannot out-argue it. You cannot out-charm it. You cannot make a grand enough gesture to pull someone back from a place of genuine self-restoration once they have actually arrived there. And here is why that matters so much. For months, maybe longer, the empath's nervous system was in a state of constant low-grade tension. Not always obvious, not always visible, but always present. That quiet background hum of anxiety that comes from loving someone inconsistently, from never quite knowing which version of the connection you are going to get today, from bracing, even slightly, even unconsciously, for the next disappointment. That kind of chronic emotional tension becomes so familiar that it starts to feel normal. It starts to feel like just the way love is, and then they step back, and the tension lifts. And the first time an empath feels what life is like without that weight, without the constant emotional monitoring, without the energy spent managing someone else's capacity, without the quiet ache of reaching for connection and landing just short of it, something inside them recognizes it immediately. The body knows safety the moment it feels it. The nervous system knows regulation the moment it stops bracing, and the mind that spent so long analyzing and replaying and hoping and adjusting, finally goes still in a way it had forgotten was possible. That stillness becomes the new baseline, and once the body has tasted what it feels like to operate without chronic relational stress, it does not voluntarily return to it. This is not stubbornness. This is not pride. This is basic human biology making a very clear and very firm decision about what it is willing to sustain going forward. This is the moment most people misread entirely. They see the empath calm. They see them smiling. They see them moving through their days with a kind of quiet groundedness that was not there before. And they interpret it as performance, as pretending, as a front designed to provoke jealousy or inspire pursuit. So they come forward. They apologize. They make promises. They try to re enter with everything they withheld before. But what they do not understand is that the calm is not performance. The calm is real, and it is not pointed at them. It has nothing to do with them anymore. The empath is not thinking about how they appear. They are not tracking whether the apology landed. They are not secretly hoping the gesture is enough to pull them back. They are genuinely, and this is the part that is hardest to accept, they are genuinely okay. They found things that refill them.